the credit. I am the program manager for advocacy and system change at the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, and I will be one of your co-facilitators today. Please note as well, this webinar is being recorded, so you will not show up, your name or your image will not show up in the webinar recording whatsoever, but your name will show up if you participate in the chat box. So if you are wanting to rename yourself on the call, that is absolutely fine. You can do that by clicking the three dots that should be at the top right corner of your name. But do let us know if you have any issues doing that, and we can help you out. Jessica, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'd like to say thank you for joining us today for Recognizing and Responding Economic Abuse webinar. My name is Jessica Tran, and I'm the Program Manager of Education and Awareness at CCFWE. We just have a couple notes before we begin. So again, this content in the webinar will include explicit discussions around various forms of gender-based violence that may be triggering for some audience members. So if at any point that you feel uncomfortable or you need to take a break from the session, please feel free to do so. Again, this webinar is being recorded. This webinar is being presented for informational purposes and to bring awareness to the issues of economic abuse. So please be cautious of sharing any personal information or stories. If you would like to share your story anonymously, you may visit our website at ccfwe.org, share your story. And please post any questions that you may have throughout the session in the chat box, and we'll answer them to the best of our abilities at the end. We would just like to know that we are not a mental health service provider or mental health professionals. Neither we nor CCFWE provides counseling services. So if you're in need of any resources or services regarding this, please contact info@ccfwe.org, and we can assist you with the appropriate services for that.
Perfect. So before we dive in today, we want to take a moment to reflect on the land that we live and work on, and which the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment operates. What has come to be known as the City of Ottawa resides on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people and is now home to a range of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We encourage you to investigate which treaties, if any, apply to where you're tuning in from today, and take some time to reflect on your own relationship to such treaties and how they shape the context in which you live, work, and play. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples for their valuable past and present contributions, and we commit to actively working towards anti-racism and reconciliation in solidarity with these communities on both a personal and organizational level. We can go to the next slide. And we'd also like to acknowledge the past and present survivors of family violence and recognize their courage, strength, and acts of resistance and resilience. We are very grateful for their vulnerability and collaboration that fundamentally shapes our work at CCFWE. And we also would like to thank our volunteers, summer students, National Task Force partners, and families for their tireless efforts. Together, we are able to prepare and equip families to access safe and effective services and supports. And I'll pass it now to you, Jessica, to talk a bit more about the organization.
Okay, so for those of you who are just learning about CCFW for the first time or may not have heard of us, the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, it is a national organization based here in Ottawa, and it's dedicated to empowering domestic violence and economic abuse survivors through advocacy, education, economic empowerment, and policy change. Our work is informed by current evidence and lived experience of survivors. So during this webinar, there will be lots of quotes that we collected and gathered from real survivors and actual survivors of economic abuse. The mission here at CCFWE, we work collaboratively with organizations and individuals to develop a comprehensive approach that enables domestic violence survivors to recover from economic abuse It also addresses critical policy gaps that are preventing survivors from recovering and becoming economically secure and independent. We envision a world where domestic violence survivors can access and receive the resources they require to develop and achieve economic independence and empowerment, and so to improve their general well-being. And our main objectives here at CCFWE to help survivors heal, build resilience, and lead a healthy lifestyle, to influence policymakers and financial institutions to remove structural financial obstacles that impact the economic empowerment of survivors, and to raise public awareness on economic abuse in the context of domestic violence. So before we get started, we just want to conduct a short poll. So how well could you define economic abuse? All right. Okay, so it looks like with a couple of votes here, we've got a few folks, 75% somewhat have an idea. This is my first time learning about it, and we have an expert here, so that's good. So everyone has somewhat an idea mostly, so that's good.
Excellent. So before we can really start talking about economic abuse, it's important that we're all operating from the same definition. So for the purposes of today's session, we will be using the definition of economic abuse as the range of behaviors which allow a perpetrator to control someone else's economic resources or freedoms. The economic abuse umbrella includes more in its definition than financial abuse, which typically refers to someone who is denying or restricting another individual's access to money or misusing someone else's money. Economic abuse also includes restricting access to essential resources, including food, clothing, transportation, or denying the means to improve a person's economic status, say through employment or education or training. Economic abuse limits a victim's choices and ability to access safety. Lack of access to economic resources can then result in victims staying with abusers for extended periods of time, resulting in more harm. And we can definitely see this with the COVID-19 pandemic, which we'll get into a bit later. So we can go to the next slide. So economic abuse can show up in behaviors including someone interfering with their partner's ability to access employment, social benefits, or finances, accumulating credit card debt in a partner's name, preventing their partner from going to work, or otherwise sabotaging their employment opportunities or opportunities to advance in their career. They might also prohibit their partner from using credit cards, writing checks, or accessing joint bank accounts. They may control the use of property and personal items, including cell phones or vehicles. They may coerce their partner into signing legal documents that their partner might not understand if there's a language barrier or just general jargon in the documents that someone might not understand. They might also prolong divorce proceedings to intentionally put a financial strain on their partner. And as we'll discuss throughout our time together, all of these behaviors can take place even after a victim has left an abuser, especially with technological advancements. So again, on the other hand, financial abuse more specifically involves a perpetrator using or misusing money, which limits and controls their partner's current and future actions and their freedom of choice. So it can include using credit cards without permission, putting contractual obligations in a partner's name, or gambling with family assets. Financial abuse can also leave victims unable to afford basic essentials, including food and clothing, as is the same for economic abuse. And it may also leave them without access to their own bank accounts, with no access to independent income, or with debts that have been built up by an abuser. Currently, there's little to no data focused on economic abuse within Canadian communities, So CCFWE is collaborating with some really incredible international partners to inform our approaches to research and make sure this issue is discussed and eradicated. So we have some information for you here from Stats Canada, and they tell us that over half of all women residing in Canadian shelters report experiencing financial abuse, and Indigenous women are nearly twice as likely to experience emotional or financial abuse than their non-Indigenous counterparts. The numbers reported are likely also smaller than the amount of actual instances that take place. We can move on. The lifelong emotional, mental, and physical impacts of gender-based violence in Canada are incalculable, though we're able to quantify factors like medical attention, lost wages and education, damaged and stolen goods that sum up to about $6 billion each year in Canada alone. The intersection of physical violence and financial abuse are evident, with 95% of women who experience domestic abuse reporting economic abuse as well. And women who experience economic abuse are also 5 times more likely to experience physical violence than those who do not. So we'll get into now some of the ways that COVID-19 has exacerbated the issue of economic abuse. And to start, I'd like to read a quote that a survivor has shared with us. So it states, "The physical violence started during COVID-19. I had to leave, and now I am experiencing homelessness. I'm trying to secure a home, but I have to pay a high deposit to move in. I left everything behind." And this experience is unfortunately one of many that demonstrates how physical and economic abuse very often overlap with one another. We can move on. And nearly half of individuals who also reported experiencing economic abuse said that abusers interfered with their ability to work or study during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this could be in the form of refusing to support with childcare or not allowing access to the equipment necessary to work. So as many of us know, with working from home, that can often be things like laptops or computers. Nearly 80% of respondents reported that the perpetrator had attempted to control their money or finances during the pandemic, and upwards of 80% of respondents with child support arrangements were concerned about not being able to access those payments. And as you may expect, over half of people reported that their ability to seek support in relation to their perpetrator had been impacted by lockdowns.
So just looking at the Canadian context, here's some research that we gathered based in the NCR, so Ottawa region. And this research is fairly new that we've been conducting. So what we found was 92% of women have experienced their perpetrator keeping financial information away from them. 93% have had their perpetrator make important financial decisions without talking to them at first. 94% of women have had their rent or bill money spent by the perpetrator without their permission, and 84% of victims' abusers have built up debt under their name. So these are fairly high statistics, as you can see, and especially with this current research during the pandemic and with other systemic issues as well, that a lot of women are experiencing economic abuse in a way that their financial decisions are affected, and their debt and their banking and their personal lives are affected as well. And so did you know that a newcomer woman experienced unique obstacles, as without legal status in Canada, individuals are unable to access many financial supports. So adding on top of this, it's difficult. Maybe, for example, you're coming to the country, your English is not as well, or you have to rely on a partner or family member for work, or you have to stay home with children, and everyone's starting at a new school for the first time. So there are a lot of barriers to overcome. And so newcomer women experience economic abuse as well, and they have more issues accessing financial supports. So we'll just review some economic abuse definitions and tactics. There are 4 main ones that we'll discuss: economic abuse, economic control, employment sabotage, and economic exploitation. So women in intimate partner relationships may experience economic abuse in a variety of forms. It can involve denied access to bank accounts, information and decision-making rights regarding family finances, or having severely curtailed choice regarding purchases. So with economic abuse, it includes behaviors that control a victim's ability to acquire, use, or maintain resources, as we mentioned before, thus threatening his or her economic security and potential for self-sufficiency. So here are some tactics listed, and it may include interfering with efforts to maintain a job by sabotaging childcare, transportation, or other arrangements, harassing you at your workplace, themselves refusing to work, not including you in family financial decisions, not allowing you to access family finances, making you ask for money, taking your money, demanding an account of everything you buy, controlling your access to financial information, not allowing you to talk to other people about money, not allowing your name to be on accounts, which if you're trying to build credit and you're not allowed to have your name on accounts, this could be very difficult for you in the future if you want to build your own credit, forcing you to put your name on accounts, and then destroying your credit afterwards so that you won't be able to build it in the future. Economic control is when the perpetrator prevents the victim from having access to or knowledge of the finances and having any financial decision-making power. So tactics includes controlling and limiting the victim's access to financial resources, denying them access to necessities such as food, clothing, medication, tracking the victim's use of money, withholding or hiding jointly earned money, preventing the victim from having access to a bank account, or lying about shared properties and assets. Employment sabotage. So this could be forbidding, discouraging, or actively interfering with the victim's employment or in educational endeavors, harassing the victim at his or her workplace, obstructing victim from receiving other forms of income such as child support, public assistance, or disability payments. Economic exploitation. So this occurs when the perpetrator intentionally engages in behaviors aimed to destroy the victim's financial resources of credit. So this could be stealing money, checks, automated teller machine cards, so your debit card, your credit cards, opening or using victim's line of credit without permission, refusing to pay bills or running bills under the name of the victim or his or her children, gambling jointly earned money.
Okay, so we're going to take a look briefly at this graphic, which is the Economic Abuse Power Control Wheel. And this was developed by Dr. Nicholas Sharp at the organization Surviving Economic Abuse, or SEE. And this wheel depicts various tactics an abusive partner may use to keep a victim trapped in a relationship. The inner parts of the wheel are composed of subtle, continual behaviors, and the outer ring represents overt intimidation, coercion, or physical violence. And there's many common themes throughout this wheel, including behaviors that demean and dehumanize a victim, including making them ask for money or providing an allowance, minimizing how they feel, or gaslighting them into thinking that it is their responsibility or they are at fault for the way that their partner is spending money. So abuse is cyclical and overt, as well as covert, and both types of behaviors feed into one another and reinforce one another. Another quick note is that while this graphic assumes a female victim and a male abuser, people of all genders can both experience and perpetrate economic abuse and abuse of all kinds.
Okay, and here we have another economic power and control wheel. This is based off the previous one. However, this is a fairly recent one developed by Jennifer Glinsky. of the University of Glasgow, where she is conducting her PhD research on economic abuse. With this wheel, it focused on post-separation economic power and control. So this is abuse that happens post-separation, post-relationship, when leaving a relationship or an abusive relationship. And this wheel examines issues facing women and their children after they leave an abuser, in particular the ways in which an abuser may use different tactics such as children to maintain their power and control over the former partner. And one of the main factors of creating this post-separation power control is the use of an ongoing fear. And this can cause coerced debt by using coercion, threat, harassment, and intimidation. The main components of this wheel, it focuses on abusers using, as you can see, economic abuse, but also using children, banking, manipulating institutions, abusing court processes, using emotional abuse, and using harassment and intimidation. So manipulation and emotional abuse, it can include things like simply just as verbal harassment, saying things to belittle the other person, and continuing this even after you've left the relationship. I would just like to note that if you are interested in learning more about this, we do have an event coming up in October, October 13th, around the same time. And Jennifer Galinsky will actually be joining us for that event. So it is on Eventbrite, but you can definitely send us an email and we'll send you the link to the event. Here's another quote from a story from a survivor. I was completely financially secure and living the life I'd always wanted to and was totally in control until about 7 years ago. I met a guy and began a relationship. During that relationship, there was physical, mental, and financial abuse. He completely lied about his financial situation, but during the relationship, it got to the point where if I asked about his situation, he would just blow up. Where did all the money go? Another story relating to economic abuse and power control, the financial abuse, the impact of that. I found out more about once that the relationship was over. In that time, he was spending money, he gambled. It's hard to tell. Like Lyd said, where did all the money go? But yeah, he just dismantled me in every way. I ended up at the end of the relationship. I finally got away. I ended up with nothing but financial debt. I had a business and I lost that too. I lost my home, my business, most of my friends. I didn't have the knowledge or the strength to fight him in court, and nor did I have the support of family. And so as you can see, even when the relationship is over, the impacts are severely great afterwards, and they're ongoing, and individuals, it's very difficult for them to seek help, or if any of those things in the post-separation power and control wheel are still affecting the person, things like fighting them in court or obtaining resources is almost impossible.
So we've talked quite a bit at this point about what economic and financial abuse look like and how that is evidently very unhealthy. We would like to talk a bit now about what a healthy relationship may look like as it relates to finances. So to start, both partners have access to financial statements and information, even if one partner is primarily managing the finances. Couples would also feel safe to identify and voice when they have different values or financial goals, and there's room for negotiation. Both would also recognize and respect that decision-making is equal, regardless of who earns more income, and each partner is able to access their own money independently, and both should have an equal understanding of how their money is being spent.
So some of the impacts of economic abuse, we've discussed a little bit of post-separation and how can it affect individual with their finances. However, the impacts may also include physical, emotional, and mental. So the physical impacts may include health risks from stress, such as malnutrition. This could be because from emotional and mental that you're not eating as well or eating as much, but also financially, if you are have to provide food for children and money is scarce, then you may not have enough money to buy enough food for yourself to eat as well. Emotional and mental, women who are controlled economically and have never been able to flourish will feel as if there will never be enough money. And as a result, they have high levels of anxiety, fear, stress, which can cause them to make unwise decisions or be unable to see the long-term financial solutions. PTSD is 7 times higher in relationships where economic abuse has occurred. Economic abuse is also the strongest indicator of suicide attempts for women in abusive relationships. So these impacts can stay with an individual for up to 30 years, as our research has shown. And I would just like to note that all the stats that you see in this presentation will be included in the fact sheet, and they'll be referenced and sourced as well. The economic impact of economic abuse. So this can include poverty, homelessness, debt, damaged credit record, and bankruptcy. So the impact of economic abuse on a victim's financial security can be long lasting. It doesn't end when the relationship does. It prevents recovery and becoming independent. Interference with education, employment. This can make it very difficult for someone to either pursue or continue education or find a job. After separation, an abuser may use family law and child support to control and damage a victim's financial security and independence. Victims may also be left responsible for debts built up by their ex-partner, making it very hard for them, to move on, want to get a home, get a loan for a car, and meet day-to-day costs. So some other quotes from survivor stories relating to this. I had to move from the apartment that I lived in, even with him, because of having a lack of rent. He jeopardized my housing. I was paying rent, but he would just keep taking money out of it. I had to go to the food bank and stuff like that because he'd take my money and go off somewhere. When he wouldn't give me money, if I needed groceries, I would go to the store and steal it for my kids. Not having money for groceries or food to send my kids to school, no shoes, backpacks, things like that the kids really, truly need.
Yeah, I just want to mention too, like Jessica said, if an abuser is hoarding wealth and resources, there are many challenges that can arise if someone is partaking in an illegal act of some kind, even if that is to support themselves or their families. For example, if you're navigating a court of law or needing to pay fines or bail, that's increasingly challenging with no financial resources. So you can imagine kind of how that sort of snowballs into more and more issues. So what should you do if you're being financially abused? If you are still in a relationship with an abuser and it's safe to do so, individuals can put any extra income, no matter how small, in a private separate account or hiding place. And people should also obtain a copy of their credit report, monitor that where possible. And again, we will send out specifics around this on the fact sheet that you'll receive in the coming days. And you can also email us for guidance around this. So great. You can also call your utility companies, cell phone provider, and financial institutions to secure any private financial information and make sure that your PIN codes and passwords for all accounts are secure. So this is also really important to do for all new credit, wireless, and or utility accounts. And these accounts can be authenticated using identifiers other than your SIN number, date of birth, or mother's maiden name that abusers may be likely to know. And last, have a plan of what to do if your savings are discovered by an abuser. the best course of action would be for individuals to contact their local domestic violence program to discuss options and learn about community resources that are available to support you. So when leaving in a relationship, folks should consider taking upwards of half of all joint funds immediately upon leaving, and 75% of funds if an individual is supporting one or more children. And ensuring ensuring that you document how you're spending these funds when you leave is really important, because you may be asked to verify this at a later date. And if possible, open a separate bank account entirely and change all direct deposit and account PIN numbers. So we have another story from a survivor for you here, and it reads, I remember there was one time I had my phone status cut off because I couldn't pay my bill on time, and I asked if I could borrow some money to make a payment, so at least I could start a payment plan with the provider. I can pay this much now, but I can do this much the next few weeks, and he wouldn't let me do that. Having a phone is quite a lifeline for me, being able to call mental health services and hotlines and things like that. So this kind of displays again the barriers that remain for survivors, and the importance of making sure the systems that we've built are inclusive of all our community members, and make sure that everyone feels safe and accommodated when they access these services. So if you or someone you know is in a situation of economic abuse, you can access the helplines listed on the screen. We'll leave that up for a second if you'd like to take a photo or screenshot of it, though this will also go out with the fact sheet that we'll be sending out that you'll see in your inbox in the next few days.
So here are some safety tips regarding if you are in a situation of economic abuse or other domestic violence abuse. So you can contact your local domestic violence program or visit Find Help across Canada. They can help you move forward and gain financial independence and help put you in touch with the resources in your area. You can also feel free to reach out to us at CCFWE and email info@ccfwe.org as well, and we can definitely assist you in finding the right resources as well. Some workplace safety tips. So if it is safe, available, and appropriate, consider the following. Provide your supervisor and company security with a copy of your protection order if you have one. Provide your employer's security and reception people with your partner's photograph. Ask security to escort you to and from parking lot or to public transportation. Screen your telephone calls. Consider changing your work schedule and travel patterns to and from work. Save threatening emails, voicemails, letters, and gifts if you choose to use the legal system. So this is also very important post-separation as well. And this evidence will be helpful if you have a protection order or document problems. This will help you prove that your partner or ex-partner is violating the order if you collect all of that evidence and information beforehand. Request your workspace to be moved to a more secure area or to another site if possible. Get a donated cell phone from your local domestic violence shelter or a prepaid cell phone. This will provide you with another way to contact help or emergency services if needed. Staying safe is very important during this time, and having those safety tips may help you in the long run. So technology, as we live in a technology predominant society and different apps and things are coming about, technology can also facilitate abuse as well. So if you are in an abusive relationship, it is very important that you continue to have access to technology such as your phone or computer to find support and stay in touch with your friends and family. However, of course, technology can be used negatively by your partner, ex-partner, or by their networks to abuse, humiliate, or control you. And it can even be used to monitor your communications and activities without your knowledge.
So some warning signs we have here that you may be able to see from current or former partners are that they may seem to know what you're doing online when they should not have access to that information. They may know where your children are or turn up unexpectedly where you are. They may know information from private conversations, messages, or emails. They might have access to your phone or computer or request PIN codes from you for your personal accounts. If your partner or former partner has access to your phone, they can also access things like call logs, emails, texts, browser histories, or load spyware. So these are some things to look out for as well that would be strange or unusual if these things start to happen and make you feel unsafe in any way. So those can be things like your passwords have stopped working for your accounts, or you finally, you find yourself having your accounts restricted in some way. If you have unexpectedly been given a gift that's an electronic device, like a phone, it could very well have location tracking on it. The same goes if an individual has children that are being given these sort of devices. And especially if a former or current partner is insistent on people taking these devices, there can very well be tracking turned on it. And folks might do this quite often with situations of separation. And yeah, looking out for abusive emails or texts from strange numbers or anonymous senders are important to look out for as well. So if anything kind of resonated with what we have been talking about in that last slide, this information will also be in the fact sheet we send out, but we'll briefly touch on how to protect yourself through these various means. So for devices, setting strong passwords, turning off location on your devices, using a prepaid phone can be really helpful, especially with antivirus protection. This also applies for if you are a parent and your children have devices, it's great to turn off location on those as well. For internet usage, there is a private browsing option, the option to delete your browser history, or use someone else's internet entirely, whether that's a trusted family member or friend, or a public library computer, or an internet cafe. For email addresses, it's best to not have any identifying information in your email address. So say your name or year of birth. You can also use a trusted friend or family member's account. And this is important as well for safety planning in the event that you may need to set up a bank account, and also be aware of sort of unusual looking attachments that you may receive in email as well. For social media, avoid posting any kind of identifying information again, including photos, locations you might be, block abusive or unknown people, and only add people that you know personally on accounts. You can also have the highest level of privacy settings turned on to ensure that you won't be able to get searched through different social media, to ensure that you have to add people rather than them able to find you and add you. So it can be a bit intimidating to find where to seek help from an abuser, and it's important to know that there are many options for accessing resources and supports. And while online options can make it easier to access support, there are also some considerations to ensure that your privacy and safety are prioritized while using those.
Some considerations before using technology to seek help. What if it's not safe to talk out loud on the phone? So many helplines and services offer multiple ways to connect, including text message or online chat, if you want to keep your conversations more discreet. You can also use technology strategically to get help or connect with people you trust. So there's different apps for that as well. You can consider what may be a safe option for you? Do you want to be able to call for help quickly, or do you want a safe way to get a supportive ear when you need someone to talk to? Could someone see my conversations if I use a text line? So these are all things to consider. And here are a list of different helplines here in Canada that offer text service. They're national and provincial. So you can see there's Canada-wide, there's Ontario and Quebec listed there. So these will be available on the fact sheet as well, but if you want to take a screenshot or a photo, feel free to do so that you have this resource. Okay, and here are some different ways you can get involved, especially with CCFWE. And one of them is the 360 expert group. And this is an expert by experienced survivors of financial and economic abuse group. So for things like you controlled all the money, I had no account for every cent I spent. I trusted them with my money. Now I'm left with all these debts. And when we got married, I had some savings, a job with a car, the marriage is over, now I've got nothing. And so if these stories that we've mentioned are resonate with you or sound familiar, or you've gone through a situation or you know someone who has, we would love to hear from you. You can join our group. It's a group of informed women who have experienced domestic violence and economic abuse. And here you can share your story with other people, develop and learn coping skills, improve self-esteem, and identify the tools and resources that you may need or someone else may need. And the long-term goal of this group is to provide recommendations that will shape and develop policy recommendations and for education awareness purposes as well. The National Task Force is a group of experts as well on a different level. That's more of a group of professionals and experts from different organizations, different levels of government and so on, and who are leaders in providing strategic direction and leadership to influence policy, government, and industry responses to economic and financial abuse. So if that seems like a fit for you, we would love to hear from you as well. So some other quotes: he controlled all the money I'd spent, no account for every cent I spent. I trusted him with their money, now I'm left with all his debts. When we got married, I had some savings, a job and a car, the marriage is over and I've got nothing. I don't care about the money, I just want to feel safe, get away and start again. So these are some examples of stories from this 360 expert group. Again, if you go to ccfw.org, you can find out how you can get involved in that.
So in terms of ways to stay involved, all of these are also listed on our website, but you can join the Help Us Rise campaign starting in November. You can also attend our upcoming events. As Jessica mentioned, we have an event with Jen Glinsky coming up to discuss the post-separation economic power and control wheel in depth. You can partner with us. If you have a lived experience with economic abuse, you can share your story anonymously with us through our website. And you can also follow us on social media to stay up to date on our upcoming events and opportunities. And with that, we would like to thank you all so much for making the time to be with us this afternoon. It has been very valuable for us to learn more about this issue alongside all of you and from the survivors that continue to bravely share their stories with us. And a reminder as well that National Economic Abuse Awareness Day is coming up on November 26th, during which time we will have our Help Us Rise campaign going. And you can stay tuned for more information on that by following us on social media. And I know we have a couple of questions we've gotten, which we'll go to now. So I have one question about wanting to ask a question, but not using the chat box. Yeah, if you're not comfortable doing that, that's totally okay. You can definitely reach out to us by email to have someone respond to you from the organization. And our other question is, do you have any data on the prevalence of economic abuse in relationships with no other reported types of abuse, i.e. physical, emotional? Is it common for it to be the sole form of abuse in a relationship, or does it often overlap with other types? That is a really good question. So there isn't currently any national data on this. CCFWE will actually be commencing national research, which will be the first of its kind, in January of 2022. And we also have a report that will be published next month focused on the COVID-19 pandemic and economic abuse in the Ottawa region specifically. But again, we would invite you to attend our webinar events for the most current research on this.
I see that, is it pronounced Rocchio? Would like to voice their question.
I'm not sure that we have that ability for today. So I apologize for that.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't think we have that option in this webinar, but if you want to email us, I'll provide the email in the chat here and we'll get to you as soon as possible.
Hello?
Oh, hello?
Yeah, I just got unmuted. So is it okay to ask a
Okay.
question?
Okay, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, thank you again for putting together this presentation. Like, it's really good to see the stats because my experience with working at a women's shelter and then later as a financial coach, it was hard to just get the stats in place. But my question is, I'm wondering, and I know there's a lot of studies done on what the impact is of like the abusers and how much the control is. But what I was coming against was the systemic barriers with the impact, like the impact of the actions of abusers. So a few things that I can think of off the top of my head, like you know, partners that would decide not to do taxes for years, and the person that is the victim of abuse leaves the situation and then later has to deal with that that process of trying to work with the different government agencies to try to access benefit. And there's no, and my question is there work happening to change some of those policies so that victims can get access to the kind of the child tax benefit, the GST benefit quicker than waiting for proof of income? Like, you know, there's so many things that I could list off, but there are some systemic barriers, like even in the banking system that I can think of, I can name and give examples like from my work, but and like the longer term impact on the control that happens during relationships. Like if you are forced to stay home and not work for years as an elderly senior, that's going to impact your CPP. So those are some things that were coming up for me and wondering if that is also part of your work at this point in time, or is it just for education? And yeah, that's my question is what work are you doing to impact
Are you from
the systemic?
Oh, okay. And did you mention, are you from the financial sector?
I'm not anymore. I'm not, I never worked as a financial advisor. I worked as a financial coach, but more from like a support service for people experiencing financial crisis. So
Okay,
a lot, yeah.
With those barriers being experienced, especially through financial institutions, as you mentioned, like when you went to the bank and they may not seem as knowledgeable on economic abuse or how to help someone.
Mm-hmm.
We are conducting research and recommendations for financial institutions and the financial sector, which includes their employees and higher up to how to address and how to support victims and survivors as well, post and during. So we are working on creating education awareness materials for financial institutions as well.
Yeah, I can speak in terms of system change, which is, you brought up some really amazing points. And thank you also for mentioning your experience. That sounds like you are very in tune with a lot of the barriers that these folks would experience. So yes, our organization does address policy and systems change quite directly. It's one of our main pillars of programming and advocacy. So at the moment, we have a letter that we're sending out to various politicians to commit to a certain standard of supporting victims of economic abuse. We also have a campaign we're doing right now to, what are we doing? We are getting economic abuse to be explicitly mentioned in the Canadian Criminal Code, because that, like you're saying, a lot of people just don't have a basic knowledge of the issue. And because there's so little research, especially in a Canadian context, it's really hard for us to actually address and eradicate this issue if we're not talking about it to begin with. So that's sort of some of the big steps that we're taking right now, is to make sure that those terms are recognized in Canadian documents, to make sure that we can then get people proper supports by saying, hey, like, this is something we've identified. We have ample data to back this across many different countries. This is something that we need to be addressing and taking really seriously.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I know we have a couple minutes here. I'm not sure if any other folks have any questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat. And again, we're happy to respond to any that you may not want to ask right now through our email.
Again, November 26th is National Economic Abuse Awareness Day. And we have some upcoming events as well this month and next month. So some of the research based in Ottawa and some of the stats that you saw in this webinar, we are going to go more in depth and have an event for our research dissemination, which is the end of the month, September 30th. And we will have our research director who will present our research on economic abuse and the pandemic. And we also have Jen Blinsky's event coming up in October, as we mentioned. We also have the policy event as well, which is happening
The 23rd.
Yes, the 23rd as well. And we will have a economic abuse and financial institutions webinar as well coming up in October. So stay tuned for all those events. Reach out to us if you would like us to send you the link. We'll do it anyways. But yeah, for now, if nobody else has any other questions, I guess that's it. So thank you so much for joining us today. Any words, Joanna?
Yeah, thank you all so much for making the time. We worked hard on the session, so I hope that it was informative for you. And yeah, really appreciate your time and attention and meaningful questions. So please let us know if you have any others. We'll stick around for a couple minutes. And otherwise, we hope to see you at the next event.